Here.
Lancy Zumi.
Here.
Peter McDougall.
Here.
Deborah Malkinhead.
Here.
Alex Perez.
Here.
Michelle Price. Here. Henry Ramos.
Here.
Gary Reed.
Here.
Okay. I'm going to ask the Honorable Gary Reed to lead us in the pledge today.
Please stand. Salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you, Member Reed. Let me start just by telling everybody, as you know, this is our second, what I hope is a continuing yearly meeting in the Capitol. I think it's great to get out a bit. I also want to remind folks that when you do want to speak, make sure you do press your microphone button. It will light up. And I do believe, also remember, we are being broadcast throughout the building today into the staff offices. With that, I would like to, on behalf of the board, formally welcome our newest member, Natalie Berg, who is with us today. Very nice to have you here, Natalie. And Natalie, I think you're going to love your time on the board. We have a great group here. Everybody is very, very helpful to all of our new board members, so don't be afraid to ask anything. But if you would, could you maybe share some things about yourself with the board?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I want you to know that I am very excited to be here, and I'm sorry it took me a little while to finally make it here, but I am very excited. And I have a very long history with community colleges, so I'm really familiar. I started out at City College of San Francisco as a part-time teacher. Went from a part-time teacher to a full-time teacher, and from there held 5 different administrative positions at City College, working up through the ranks. I ended City College working at City College as the Dean of the School of Health in the John Adams campus, which is the second largest campus in San Francisco for City College. It had 3,000 students and 400 faculty, and it was very, very exciting. And from there I ran for the board, and I continue to be on the board today, and I am very, very honored to be part of this very prestigious organization, and I thank you very much for your welcoming me today.
Great. Well, we welcome you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Me too.
President's report, just very quickly. Only really a couple of things. One, I wanted to let you know that I have had a couple of very, very good meetings with Jan DeHesh, the president of our foundation board. We continue to establish a very, very good working relationship. Those discussions have been very, very positive. I'm fully briefed on the foundation now. I think they're making some great progress thanks to Member Reed and Member Ramos and others. I think they're in a very, very good place. Jan will be at our meeting later, and I will attend the foundation board meeting also on November 30th. The other kind of interesting thing I just wanted to let the board know, I have been contacted by a group called the Amundsen Foundation that does a lot of work in higher education. They're based in China. And they have expressed an interest in speaking with us and community college presidents and the chancellor on establishing some sort of exchange degree program. So I'll be sitting down with them a little bit later. I've already recruited a couple college presidents to help me on that. So I'll bring back more news of that as I hear more. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Chancellor for the Chancellor's report.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. In many ways, I think the big news in the past 2 months has been really the Student Success Task Force under the able leadership of one of your members, Dr. Peter McDougall. I made 3 appearances last week to open sessions. One was a town hall meeting in Central California at Fresno City College. Another meeting was before the Academic Senate in San Diego. And then on Friday, I was at the Student Senate, and I see Kevin Feliciano in the audience, and that was a very enjoyable experience. And in all cases, we heard a lot, and we were able to absorb quite a bit, answered a lot of questions, and we feel one of the things that the Student Success Task Force did is to come up with 22 draft recommendations. And I underlined the word draft because it was our idea to go out to a lot of different groups to get feedback and then to meet again, which we will be meeting, incidentally, on Wednesday of this week here in Sacramento, and we have another meeting scheduled for December 7th. So we'll be, giving some careful attention to the input that we've received, and in turn, we will eventually, of course, our aim is to have recommendations ready for this body in January, because that's what the bill, Senate Bill 1143, called for, was that they said that the task force would meet and then present their recommendations to the Board of Governors in January and then report to the legislature in March. One of the things we keep emphasizing is, number one, right now our recommendations are only draft recommendations. And secondly, once even this body adopts those recommendations, they don't exactly become immediately effective. For one thing, there are 3 different ways in which these recommendations could be enacted. One, in some cases, it would require legislation, and so naturally we would have to present through some legislator's effort some of the recommendations. Secondly, some of them would be regulations that would be reviewed and acted upon by this board. And thirdly, in some cases, it's merely encouraging best practices. It doesn't follow that, for instance, we say in there that one of our first recommendations is that there be a closer interaction between high schools and community colleges, and for teachers of the various disciplines to interact with their high school counterparts. Well, we're not going to mandate that and review that, but we do feel it would be a great practice to implement. So we need to keep in mind that these recommendations are, number one, not in the final form, and number two, all of them will call upon some subsequent action, which may take quite some time. I did go, as I said, I went to 3 different appearances. I've also appeared before the CEO board, the CCCT board, the CTA convention, and the Campaign for College Opportunity, and I'm scheduled to be at the Northern California Town Hall meeting, which will be in Oakland a little bit later. I want to compliment Paul Feast, our new vice chair. I don't know that he's so new, but he's been with us several months. He's been very effective in getting me to meet with editorial boards. I met with the Sacramento Bee last week on Monday, and then on Wednesday when I was in Fresno, I met with the Fresno Bee, and then on Thursday I met with the San Diego Union Tribune. And in all cases, I thought the reception was quite good. In fact, there was an article that came out in Friday in the San Diego Union Tribune. Constance Carroll, the chancellor of the San Diego Community College District, went with me, and I thought the article was quite favorable in the kinds of recommendations that we're making. I also have a scheduled appearance before the Los Angeles Times editorial board on November 30th, the same day that the foundation board will be meeting, and when I'm through with that editorial meeting, I'll come on over to the foundation board and sit in on that. I will explain one thing. In the last 2 months, I had the interesting experience of serving on a jury. Now, I'd been called to jury duty before, and I wasn't selected, but this time I was. I guess I told the truth, and so I didn't get out of and it was a 4-week, it was a civil trial, so you can imagine I was doing a lot of calling during the noon break. We were off on Fridays, so I could be in the office on that, but it did dip into my work a little bit. I guess I have to mark it up as doing my civic duty, and I won't have to do that again for 18 months. It was a very interesting experience, and except for the time it took, I found it to be worthwhile, and I have a greater appreciation for the American judicial experience. I was in New York City a week before last I've been appointed to an advisory panel of community college presidents throughout the nation. There's about 10 of us on this panel, and I got a lot of great ideas from the College Board on the whole college completion agenda. This idea of student success is not something peculiar only to California. It's more or less the main topic that I hear discussed throughout the nation among community colleges. Last Monday, October 31st, we met with the Little Hoover Commission and collaborated with them. They've been discussing community colleges, and I think overall we're going to be rather pleased with their recommendations that they come out concerning the community college. I think they too have been impressed with the work of the Student Success Task Force. On occasions, I do meet with the entire staff, and we had a meeting on October 24th with the entire staff, and I went through some details about the Student Success Task Force, and we also discussed this particular document. We took a survey of our staff and just to measure their responses on a whole host of things, and we have shared this, well, we shared it with the entire staff, but particularly with our managers to make sure that they are open to any suggestions, criticisms, or whatever. It was pointed out that the survey this time was a little more favorable than the survey that had been taken, I think it was 4 years ago. Is that right, Steve? 5 years ago. But Steve pointed out that there's been such turnover in our office that it's sometimes a little difficult to compare. I'll just share with you briefly some statistics that our Vice Chancellor of Institutional Research, Patrick Perry, gave me. The fall enrollment this year in 2011, the head count is down by 4.2%, but the full-time equivalent students, that is we call FTES, is down 3.4%. Now, remember that our funds were cut by 5%, and as a result of that, the legislature and the governor permitted us to reduce our course offerings by 5%. I can tell you for sure that the head count would not have been down if we had had the kind of resources that we really need. The demand is great, but the supply is a little thin. And so what we have to do, all the colleges have engaged in this simply because they don't have the resources. And you know, each district, community college district, has a cap. And if they go beyond that cap, they are educating students without any remuneration. So most colleges have had to, as a result of this fiscal scarcity, have had to reduce their course offerings. I'm sure that the two of you who are serve on a local board of trustees understand this problem quite well. And I'm very familiar with it because I recall when I served as president of Pasadena City College one year, we got absolutely no increase in enrollment and no increase in money. And so because we had exceeded our cap considerably the year before, we had to cut back on our course offerings. And that's happening all up and down the state of California. Personally, I think this is a tragedy for the future of California because the more students we educate, the better the economy of California will be. All the statistics that I read make it extremely clear that one's future earnings are closely tied with the degree of education that one possesses. It's just a steady upward curve. You can start with those who drop out of high school, those who get only a high school diploma, those who include some college, those who get the associate degree, those who get the bachelor's degree, and master's and doctorate and professional degrees. There's a correlation, a very strong correlation between earnings and one's college education. Also, it's very clear that the more education you have, the less likely you are to be out of work. The unemployment rate is extremely high, over 15% among those that are high school dropouts. So I just share those statistics with you. Last year, our transfers at CSU went up sharply because you may recall that in the spring semester the year before, CSU cut off its transfers. So this, in 2009-10, we had 56,959 students who in 2010-11, excuse me, 56,959, and the year before we only had 37,674. And once again, there were outside influence in terms of why there's a variation. I think that's the highest, if I'm not mistaken. I believe Patrick shared that with me. This past year was the highest number of transfers that we've ever had to California State University, which happens to be the main recipient of our transfers. Now, we have a lot of transfers to University of California, a lot of transfers to private universities, and also a considerable number of transfers that go to the for-profits, such as the University of Phoenix. We have some who transfer out of state. But I thought those are just some statistics that I thought you might like. And if anybody has any questions about any part of my report, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Any questions for the Chancellor? Member McDougall.
Not a question, Chancellor, but just to reiterate your sadness with the figure of the drop-off in enrollment, the drop-off in full-time students. I don't think we can do enough to promote how the state of California is being ill-served by the inability of our colleges to accommodate the demand that exists. And I know you do a wonderful job about doing that, but I just want to reinforce, to me, that is the central issue that may lead to greater responsiveness for the system. And I just think we can't beat the drum enough on how critical it is to the state and to those human beings that they have access to our institutions.
Well, thank you for that comment, Member McDougall. I think you're right on. And I would encourage members of the Board of Governors, when you're in conversation with legislatures or in the public in general, point out that really California is making a serious mistake. We know that revenues in the state are down, and we'll hear a report on that a little bit later. And so we may even take an additional cut this year. But this, to me, is a short-range action that's going to have long-range impact. It's not going to be good. When you think of one year we turned away 140,000 students, we probably turned away over 200,000 last year. Now, when you think about those students, some of whom, even though they can postpone their education, some will never get their education. And we have really confined them to a life of less money, less appreciation for many of the cultural and historical things that you gain from a college education, and really all the evidence points to the fact that they make not quite as good as citizens when they're not as well informed. And some of the social cost, when we look at the cost of welfare, the cost of incarceration, those are also tied to these kinds of decisions. So I would like to underline that whenever you get an opportunity, our public officials need to be reminded that we're making a mistake. We and the community colleges, and I'm struck by that when I go from community college to community college, are rather heroically doing the best we can with the limited resources that we get. But we could do a great deal more, and we know we could do a great deal more if we had more resources. So that's certainly something that I appreciate your saying, Peter, because that's something we just got to keep beating the drums about, not in a whining way, but more in a way of saying, do you realize how much more we could serve the state of California if we just had the resources?
Member McDougall.
Just to add one addition to the comments, Chancellor, and I know you're very much aware of this, but I say it as much to remind myself that in addition to the state, what it's costing students to seek alternatives, we see a level of indebtedness that has never been approached before of individuals who are finishing or not finishing their degrees of $25,000 on average, which is an incredible expense to have. And many of us were able to attend universities and go through the process when there was very little cost compared to what it is today. So not only is the generation today being denied access to the extent that it existed before, but they are paying to a much greater extent that is having a negative impact on them as they begin their lives. And we're not serving this generation as well as we were served, and it's disturbing, but I just think we have to keep reminding ourselves and do what we can to change.
Other questions or comments for the Chancellor? Okay, thank you, Chancellor. We'll move on to our consent calendar, and Executive Vice Chancellor Bruckman reminds me that we can take this as a whole if we like. So the consent calendar is actually items 1.1 through item 1.4, correct? So are there any members would like to pull or ask questions or comment on any of the consent items? Member Ramos.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to know the following about our contracts and grants. Nothing in particular about the slate that we have before us, but a general question. In my short time...
If I could just...
Yes.
So do you want to pull the contracts and grants?
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, if I may, or make a comment that
Fair enough.
will
Okay.
take the form of a question.
All right.
In my short time as a member of this board, I have not really seen any particular mechanism that we have available to us as a board to discern the impacts of the grants that we have made or the contracts that we've extended. And I have no doubt that that data must be available to us through reports from the field. I don't want to burden the staff because I know that they are at capacity, if not beyond it, in terms of their reporting requirements. But I think as a board, from a policy making standpoint over time, it behooves us to understand how these grants and contracts are having an impact on the ground and to what extent it might inform adjustments that we make in our priorities, both on the Chancellor's staff and as a board.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I don't have a specific response. It's obviously a general comment. But I believe that the recipients of the grants, the vice chancellors who manage those grants can provide some more information, and we'll talk about that if the chancellor agrees, and we'll figure out a way to provide you with more information.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, Vice Chancellor.
All these funding streams, especially on the workforce and economic development side, have annual accountability. So maybe one thing we can start with is to forward to the board, and I thought that process had already been taken.
Yes.
The annual reports, accountability reports. So why don't we start there, and we can then discuss any further.
Yeah. I know. I recall that before former Vice Chancellor Mian did come before the board and give us an explanation of these particular grants, what they were doing. But I agree with you, Member Ramos. I think that, as much feedback as we can get would be helpful. Another comment.
Yeah, I just want to briefly add that my thinking on this, and I don't think I'm surprising anyone, is that in this day and age when we are competing for very thin public resources to support our work and we are falling behind, as the Chancellor has reported, I think it's imperative, to the Chancellor's point about reminding our elected officials of the import of our work, that we have specific examples of the value added of this investment. And we can point to those kinds of investments and show not just the accountabilities to the contracts and grant agreements, which I think are important, but the actual benefit to people on the ground in terms of their employability, in terms of their income generation, in terms of their taxation base that they would add value to in terms of the state's revenues. These are the kinds of things that I think our elected officials would take great interest in knowing if we could be more specific in making that case. That's just the thought.
Chancellor Scott.
I applaud the comments you made, and we'll try to furnish you more information. I will assure the board that always at our next Chancellor's Cabinet, after a board meeting, we ask the question, what are the questions that the Board of Governors has asked, and how can we respond more effectively? And so I think that Member Ramos has raised a good question, that with more information, we can be able to sell the effectiveness and the accountability that we have with these grants. So feel free, as you always do. I'm not, but all I'm saying is that I do want you to know that we take seriously your comments, because always at the next Chancellor's Cabinet, we make a list of the things that you've asked for, and in most cases, I think we've responded, and we're glad to get those kind of suggestions.
I'd like to move the consent agenda.
Okay. Second by Member Baca, moved by Member McDougall. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Okay. We've just been reminded by from Senate TV that it is important to turn your mic on when you speak. If you don't, it will not be streamed and heard throughout the offices. With that, we'll move on to our action agenda, item 2.1, Vice Chancellor Troy.
President Himmelstein, Chancellor Scott, members, good morning. The item before you at this time is item 2.1, which refers to the Mount San Antonio Community College District's request for fiscal independence. Fiscal independence sounds like a very major term, but really it's a fairly narrow request. What this does is it allows the district to issue warrants from the county treasury without having to go through the county superintendent of schools or the county auditor's office. In order to trigger this recommendation, the district has to first go to the county, make the request, and the county then provides for, actually at the district's expense, for an independent CPA to review the auditing controls and fiscal management practices of the district. The specific issues that the CPA looks are detailed beginning on the bottom of page 2. It looks at whether the district has been able to maintain adequate reserves over the prior 5 fiscal years. It ensures that the district makes expenditures in accord with statute and with their Board of Governors' direction, that the district has adequate internal controls, and that the accounting, budgeting, contract staff, and other personnel exercise independent judgment enough to ensure the legality and propriety of their transactions. The report by the CPA indicated there is no reason not to support the recommendation. The county superintendent and auditor's office from LA do support this recommendation, and given that information that we've reviewed from that independent CPA, we similarly will make the recommendation to grant the district fiscal independence. With us here today are representatives from the district. We have Mike Gregoric, who's the Vice President of Administrative Services, and also Linda Baldwin. So I turn it over to them for a couple of comments if they care to make one.
The only comment that we'd have, this has been a process that we've been working on for about 3 years. When we went with the SunGuard Banner Enterprise Application System, it set up an integrated database for us, of which our county Office of Education could not deal with because we integrate student into HR and payroll and the commercial warrants. And so we became accountable in 2009, and now we're asking for fiscal independence for effective July of 2012.
Member Baum.
First off, I want to move adoption of the recommendation.
Okay.
And then,
Second by Member Hawkins. Comments?
I wanted to move adoption of the recommendation. I forgot to turn my mic on. One is, I just have questions too. What is the benefit to a district? Is there a cost savings that is significant? What can a district expect to receive as a result of independence?
Well, for us, it was two things. One was the integrated database, which is very important, so that all the information, whether it's in the student system, in the fiscal system, it all speaks to each other. With the county, we didn't have that operation. The second piece is we paid LA County Office of Education about $350,000 annually.
Wow.
And we're not going to be paying that anymore. And that was a combination of being accountable and independent.
And then, as a broader policy recommendation, is this something we should be encouraging more districts to move towards financial independence, and what are the barriers to that?
We've already granted that status, I believe, to 8 other districts at this time. I think Mount Sac would be the ninth, but I would agree with you that maybe this is something we can communicate to the districts, that this is an option to them, assuming that they have appropriate, adequate fiscal management practices. This might be something they want to look into to achieve those efficiencies.
So business officers up and down the state know about this as an option? Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what their knowledge is of this subject, honestly, but I think probably more of them should.
Yeah, I believe they do know. One of the issues that comes up is, do you really have an integrated database management information system? And so if they don't, then the answer is no, then they can't go this route. Mm-hmm. But in that we do, we set up our own fiscal controls, and so it's working very well for Mount Sac.
Thank you.
So just a couple questions. One, do you have, knowing of the cuts that all colleges have made and the infrastructure that has been chopped away, you feel you can do this adequately, and are you going to do you take some of that $350,000 and beef up your staff, or is this software and hardware that you have able to handle it without the added staff?
To Linda's credit, Linda is our Associate Vice President for Fiscal Services. She has not added staff, and we took on this huge undertaking with the new management information system. So we don't intend to hire any new staff in these times in particular.
Sure.
Would it be nice? Of course it would be nice, but it's not on the list.
Right. And so that savings can be spent elsewhere.
Can be real savings.
I would note, if you have any concerns that they did not, for example, have adequate staff in these difficult times to conduct their practices in an appropriate manner, I note that the board does have control to rescind authority for that. We do review the annual audits. If there's indications in the future that the fiscal management practices are inadequate, we can make a recommendation.
I was just more interested. That's taking on a big piece, and I was curious with all of the cuts that colleges have faced. I find it terrific that you're able to handle that without having to add staff. Other comments or questions from members? So we have a motion by Member Baum, a second by Member Hawkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
Member Baca.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Okay, district item number 2.2, district obligation for full-time faculty hires. Vice Chancellor Troy.
Yes, as you know, statute specifies legislative intent, not a requirement, but legislative intent that the community colleges provide 75% of their instruction using full-time faculty. Again, that is not a requirement, and statute provides no particular guidelines for getting there. To that effect, the system adopted regulations that we refer to as the full-time faculty obligation number, which requires in years where adequate resources are provided by the budget that districts effectively increase their number of full-time faculty effectively by the percentage of an increase in credit full-time equivalent students. By November 20th of each year, the board is to make a determination as to whether adequate finances have been provided by that year's budget in order to support an increase in what we call the FON for short. Since the fall of 2008-9, given the lousy budget years that the system has has been hit with. The Board of Governors has found that the state has not provided adequate resources to support an increase in the FON. And given the very difficult budget that we've just gone through and had approved in June for the 11-12 year, we are going to make a similar recommendation that you freeze the FON for another year. The items that the regulations specify that the board consider in its decision include a look at growth, COLA, and the support for key categorical programs. For the 2011 and 12 year, of course, we received no COLA. In fact, the system has not received a COLA since the 2007-08 fiscal year. The roughly 40% cuts we took to categorical programs in the 9-10 budget have been continued unabated since that time. And not only did the system not receive any funding for growth this year, but we took a workload reduction, which netted out to almost $300 million this year. So given those three items, I think our recommendation is fairly clear that we recommend the board once again freeze the FON for the fall of 2012. We did present this item in consultation council last month, and while there was certainly robust discussion about the issue generally, there was not much head-on discussion about whether this budget provides adequate finances for it. So given that, I think our recommendation is pretty clear at this time, and I'll take any questions you might have about it.
Okay. Before we get to board members, we do have public comment.
Dennis Frisch from FAC. Sorry. Dennis Frisch from FAC.
Thank you very much. Dennis Frisch, President, Faculty Association, California Community Colleges. Certainly, Vice Chancellor Toy has indicated why you will take the action you're going to take. I wanted, however, to take a moment to remind the board of FAC's very long-standing commitment to making improvements in the 75-25 ratio, that is, improving the number of full-time faculty who are in our community colleges. The research is there to demonstrate that there is the one single greatest factor in student success. We're about to embark on some efforts to improve student success, and as the draft reports on the Student Success Task Force indicate. And so I think it behooves us to remember that we absolutely must make the improvement in our numbers on full-time faculty and the numbers of full-time faculty that we have if we want these recommendations, however we're going to implement them, if we want them to work and to produce the desired results of student success. So I urge the board, make improving full-time faculty numbers your first priority. There's where success comes from. Thank you very much.
Comments and or questions from board members? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Vice President Perez.
Motion to approve.
Second by member Izumi.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Item 2.3, election of board officers. Steve, do you need to do anything on this?
I would just mention that the slate was prepared at the last board meeting, and so the board is now ready to vote.
Okay. Okay, so officers nominated for next year are myself as president and Alice Perez as vice president. I guess I will entertain the motion. Member Izumi.
I move for the election of the officers stated.
Thank you. Member Davis Lyman, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Thank you very much. I look forward to leading and working with this group all of next year, as I'm sure Vice President Perez does. Okay. All right. Board of Governors meeting dates for 2013, item 2.4.
Yes, this is the schedule for next year, and really the only issue for the board to consider is the November meeting. It's not for next year, it's for 2013, excuse me. And the only issue for the board to consider is the date for the November meeting. It could be either November 4th and 5th, which is a Monday, Tuesday. The disadvantage there is that it falls on Election Day, very much just like this meeting does, but it's an off-year election. Or you could have the meeting the following week, the 12th and 13th, but because Monday, the 11th, would be Veterans Day, it would be a Tuesday, Wednesday meeting. Did I misstate?
I thought the elections were in 2012. Am I missing something?
Oh, there are elections every year.
Okay.
But 2013 is an off-year election.
Right. It's not the major.
Right. So that's why I believe this year the board did not move its meeting date for that reason. So 2013 could be similar. It's totally up to the board.
Member Malumed.
I would support the November 12th and 13th because even though it's an off-election year, I think the laws were just changed that all the initiatives have to be on a November ballot. So it might be a hot local election for you, and that might be another enticement to vote on that day.
Other comments? But November 11th is Veterans Day.
Yeah, that's the Monday.
And that's a Monday.
Yes, that's why it's a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah.
Which means we'd be traveling on the holiday
of the
to
holiday.
come up to the meeting. So
Which doesn't sound...
I tend to favor the 4th and 5th personally, but
Members, other comments?
I think there's a motion on the floor.
We have
No.
to approve one date or the other.
No, we have to, yeah.
Well, I'd move
Member
that-
Malumed, was yours a motion? I didn't think it was.
I would like to make a motion
Okay.
to plan that November 2013 meeting on the 12th and 13th.
Do we have a second? Second by Member Baca. All those in favor? Any discussion before we vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
No.
Perhaps you could make the vote a little more
Roll
clear
call.
for Jerry.
Okay, Jerry, can you call the roll, please?
This is for Deborah Malumet's motion for the 12th and 13th, and second by Manuel Baca. So, Manuel Baca,
Yes.
Jeffrey Baum,
Yes.
Natalie Bird,
Yes.
Barbara Davis Lyman. Yes. Danny Hawkins,
Yes.
Scott Himmelstein,
Yes.
Lance Zui,
Yes.
Peter McDougal,
No.
Deborah Malumet,
Yes.
Alice Perez,
Yes.
Michelle Price. No. Henry Ramos,
Yes.
Gary Reed.
No.
Passes.
There's 10 for yes.
Okay, motion passes. Okay. All right. Selection of the campus site for 2012, item 2.5.
I believe that the Chancellor perhaps was going to introduce this item. But if not, I will mention that San Diego was mentioned as the location for the meeting next year, and that was discussed at the previous meeting.
Okay.
I move a motion to accept that as the location.
Second the motion.
Motion by Vice President Perez, seconded by Member Hawkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item 2.6, trustee election waiver at community college districts. Steve, you
Yes.
again. Okay.
As the board knows, every 10 years there's a census, and on the basis of that census, district boundaries, trustee boundaries are redrawn to equalize the districts within community college districts. The California Voting Rights Act has raised concerns for a number of districts. They feel they have exposure to potential liability if they continue with their at-large trustee elections. So many districts are now converting to trustee area elections where a trustee is represented from a particular part of the district, not the district at large. Prior to this legislative session, districts were required to go to have a vote of the people to change from an at-large to a trustee area election. That was an expensive undertaking. The legislature did not feel that was necessary and has now given the Board of Governors the authority to approve the determination by districts that they would like to have trustee area elections. So over the next several meetings, we'll be seeing a number of these coming through. This was the first one. The Cerritos district has taken the appropriate steps to change from an at-large to a trustee area elections, and the Cerritos district's request that the Board of Governors approve this change and adopt the resolution.
Is there anyone from Cerritos here?
I don't. Oh.
Yes?
This was our public speaker.
Are you from the Cerritos?
I am. My name is Chris Scannell. I'm an attorney with Nielsen Mercimer, and we
Okay. Well, first, press your.
Excuse me.
Button. Okay.
We represent the Cerritos College District in connection with this issue. The Cerritos College District actually has been sued under the California Voting Rights Act. We were in the process of moving to trustee area elections anyway, and several plaintiffs submitted a demand as in the mix with that process. And so shortly before the board took final action to adopt it, a complaint was filed in Los Angeles Superior Court. So this is part of a sort of parallel process with litigation as well. The board has hired...
Excuse me, you said several filed suit?
Several plaintiffs.
Several plaintiffs.
Represented by one plaintiff.
Got it.
Excuse me. And so the board has retained a very experienced demographer and has already considered in public hearings several draft plans and anticipates adopting a final trustee area plan in December to be implemented in the 2012 elections. And so I won't take much more of your time, but I'm happy to answer questions. And we would ask that you approve our move as part of this process.
Member Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me now?
Can.
Still getting the hang of this. Well, I'm highly favorable to this proposal. I just wonder why we're not encouraging this throughout all of our districts and in every location where this would make sense. It seems to me that this is something that's happened in other governance contexts throughout the state at the county level and in cities all across California. The demographics of our state suggest that it will be a more inclusive way for us to govern. We are community colleges. It seems to me that we should be more representative, not less. It seems to me the district approach enables us to have more people who represent these communities at the table. It seems to me it would be a cost-saving measure in exchange for resisting through long and painful litigation battles. So I applaud the proposal at the table for this particular action to be taken, but I feel that it just stands to reason in my common sense that this is something that we should at least be encouraging, frankly, if not requiring our districts to take a look at. I see no downside to this. Chancellor Scott.
I will point out that I think a lot of districts right now are in this process, so I would expect at the next meeting, for instance, for there to be a lot more requests for this. I don't happen to have right at my fingertips the number of districts that use the at-large and the number of districts that use areas. I know the district to my right here that Jeff Baum represents is by areas and has been that way for a long time. So our colleges are, if you looked at it, are kind of broken up in three different ways. Some are already by areas and therefore meet this particular thrust. So they won't have to take any action as long as they make sure that the areas are equal in population. Others elect at large, but they require that their trustees be from different areas. And then there's a third group that just elect at large, period. By the way, Los Angeles Area Community College District is one of those. And so it is going to be, I think, right now, you know, there's always perhaps some division within a district as to how you ought to do it. But I don't know yet. I wouldn't even know what I wouldn't know what action that this board could take to encourage that. I don't imagine we could take an action that would require it. But if districts don't move in this direction, you're exactly right. They're going to be facing lawsuits as a result of that, because it's felt that particularly some minority groups, although they may have a large number in a district, they never have anybody on the board because it's elected by the district as a whole rather than by areas, whereas if they were elected by areas, it would be much more likely. So there is a movement underway. I would compliment the Community College League for pushing forward on this issue to make it easier, because as was pointed out, if you have to, in order to, previously they had to actually go to the voters. And of course, any election is quite expensive, and you're not so sure how the voters would end up voting anyway on an election that probably would have a very small turnout. So this is now legislatively possible to do by coming to the Board of Governors. And I would simply mention to you that I think you're going to receive quite a number of requests in this respect. And I don't know how this board feels. Certainly, Member Ramos has expressed himself well. And I can simply say to you that I know of quite a number of districts that have already been doing this through the years, and I don't think it has any downside.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up real briefly, the Community College League has been very active in this, and the Community College League probably is playing the role that you would support of encouraging this activity, and we've been working closely with the league in facilitating this process.
Member Baum, Member Baca, then Vice President Perez.
First off, I'll put the motion on the table to adopt the recommendation.
Second by Member McDougall.
My comments echo Member Ramos and the chancellors. I think this is a good move. I expect we'll see more of these. And I think the LA district is one case study that I think would benefit by having district representation in that massive district. So I think this is a good move. And I applaud Vice Chancellor Garcia and her team and the league in making the legislation possible for us to be able to help districts move in this direction without having to go through a number of additional regulatory hoops to do it.
Member Baca.
Well, given that I've been very much kept in the loop by CCLC and others.
Mic on.
It's on?
Yep, now it's on.
Okay, couldn't tell because the red light was on. Sorry about that. Given that I've been in the loop on this very closely with CCLC and then consultants locally on the issue, I think that my suspicion is that the system has been sufficiently informed of this. The trustees have, and how it actually translates is a different question. But I think that there's full awareness that the trustees have to take a very, very close look at this, and in fact take action, because what happened in Cerritos is likely to happen at other districts as well. So I think just in response to your concern about not having trustees aware of that, I think they're fairly aware of it.
Any other comments or questions? Member Ramos.
I'm sorry to prolong this a bit. I don't think my concern is so much that. I think it's the idea of this board making an encouraging statement of some kind that is affirmative to encourage this direction. I'm really pleased at the League and that our Vice Chancellor's Office for Government Affairs has taken some leadership on this and that you and others have been involved. But I think it's very important that given our policy shaping and influence role within the state, if we can do something affirmative to inform the field in an affirmative way that we encourage this, I think it would be a strong statement.
We have a motion on the table made by Member Baum, seconded by Member McDougall. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Oh,
I want to abstain.
abstain.
Because San Francisco is, thank you. San Francisco is a coterminous county and city, and our election rules are somewhat different, so I would need to do research on that.
Very good. Abstention by Member Berg. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item 2.7, proposed revisions to the FCCC bylaws and standing orders of the Board of Governors. Mr. Bruckman?
Yes, and I'm joined by Vanessa Wang, who is General Counsel for the Foundation for California Community Colleges.
Welcome,
And
Ms. Wang.
what you have before you is some revisions to the procedures and standing orders of the Board of Governors, as well as the bylaws for the foundation. The board is required to take action on or is requested to take action on its standing procedures and standing orders, and requested to take action on the bylaws as well. The details are spelled out in some detail. I won't go into them unless the board would like, and Vanessa Wang is here also to answer any specific questions.
I think it'd be helpful, Ms. Wang, maybe if you could point out some of the, I know we've all had a chance to look at this, but if you could point out some of the highlights, that would be great.
Sure. Good morning, President Himmelstein, Chancellor Scott, and members of the Board of Governors. It's my pleasure to be here this morning to essentially present the bylaws and the standing orders. I think that what is important to note, kind of before we get into the detail, and there's a lot of information here, is that the foundation has been working for, I would say, the past year to really bolster its corporate governance. And the bylaws, as you can see, have come down from a 19-page document down to 9 pages, and we really, as a board, went through a process of trying to streamline and make the bylaws efficient, flexible, and anticipate changing circumstances, reflect operational realities, and account for some corporate governance revisions. In terms of the bylaws themselves, which is where I would start, from a high level, I think that if you go to Exhibit A to Attachment 2, I would say there's about 5 categories of revisions. One being some kind of fine-tuning of the foundation's mission, some housekeeping matters, issues relating to the Board of Governors, some procedural matters, and a section regarding conflicts of interest. I would point the board to a couple particular sections, and that has to do with the Board of Governor's role. In terms of the bylaws, what we did was we inserted a clause in our bylaw.
Excuse me, what page is that?
So I think it's page 67 through 69 in your agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's see.
Page numbers for them down there.
Okay. I apologize, I didn't have this packet. I just had my documents. But anyway, going to, I would say, page 72. It talks about, and actually, as I'm looking at this, it looks like the pages are off. I think it's 68. anyway, let me try to summarize it for the board. If you do go to page 72 at the top, in that section, it talks about the appointment of 2 Board of Governors members to the Foundation's board. And then another section that we revised was a section that had to do, it's Article 8 of the Foundation's bylaws, and that had to do with special invitees, and we had to make an adjustment there. In terms of another, I think, high-level sort of item to summarize for the board, and maybe it would be easier to go to the red line version, and that is a full copy of the bylaws. 2 revisions that I would bring to the board's attention is, one, that the board, sure. On page 89, the Foundation Board has taken a look at the number of its directors and made a revision so that the bylaws reflect that the Foundation Board will have 5 and no more than 9 voting members. Another area where there was revision from a procedural matter was on page, let's see, apologize. Page 101, where our board determined that it would be more efficient for our board officers to hold 2-year terms as opposed to a 1-year term. We also made a revision to the conflicts of interest section, which is on page 104. And essentially, in our bylaws, there was a couple sentences regarding conflicts of interest, and we attempted to conform better to the education code. And so we revised that. In terms of housekeeping matters, I think we made a few revisions regarding committees, the resignation process, process for removing non-board member or non-attending board members, and we also deleted several pages concerning the Brown Act and essentially made it a reference to the Brown Act. And we also added a discussion regarding job duties for our secretary-treasurer. So there is a lot of detail in these materials, and I know that you all are moving on to very important business of today, and I'm happy to answer any specific detailed questions about the bylaws.
Okay, Vice President Perez, then Member Baum.
I just on the section page 68. I'm just trying to understand what the change was there. So directors shall be appointed for 3-year terms, but then so the proposed revision will be directors shall be appointed for 6-year terms.
Right, and the information regarding that is that I think in 2007, the foundation came before the Board of Governors and made an amendment back then to change the term of office for foundation board members from 3 to 6 years. So on page 68, that is a summary of the standing orders that essentially, given the corporate governance review and looking at everything, I worked with Steve Bruckman to update the standing orders to reflect that.
Member Baum.
It was my understanding that the foundation wanted to expand its membership in order to diversify its network of connections and networks of influence and fundraising base. According to this, you're actually looking to shrink the number of directors to as few as 5. What's the rationale behind that?
I think the foundation currently is in a time of transition, and currently we have 5 board members, so of course we want to make the revision. And in terms of putting forward the number here, essentially what we tried to do is look at how it worked from an operational standpoint, as well as looking at the corporation's code and the formulas that are in the corporation's code. In the materials, I had indicated that the foundation does recognize the board's desire to grow the board. But at this time, given kind of where we are as a foundation, this is the number that the board would like to start with.
Sure, I understand reducing it to 5, but why limit it to only 9 and not make it a higher limit?
Well, in terms of what we were doing is we were looking at the corporations code, and they have a number of different formulas that you look at to create your board, and I think that was kind of the discussion that we had at the time, which is 5 to 9, as governed by one of those formulas. Certainly, I think as we look at that and look at where the foundation is currently and intends to go, we can always come back to the Board of Governors and, come up with a different number.
Okay. So, yeah, there's nothing that prevents you from going from 9 to 11.
Well, they'd have to come back to us
in the future, they'd have to come,
approval.
right. Right. So, Vice President Perez had a question, then Member Ramos.
Just a point of clarification. Currently, there is no term limits on the board, and you're not recommending any term limits. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the current members of the board have been serving continuously for, some of those members have been there since, the
98.
foundation started?
Right.
Okay. Is that something that was not addressed or didn't appear to need to be addressed?
I think that in terms of the foundation, it is helpful to have kind of that historical board membership. Certainly, it was not something that the board contemplated, but as I sit here today thinking about it, I would not necessarily recommend a board term, a limit. So I'd be happy to have some discussion about that.
Member Ramos.
Yes, thank you. I had the opportunity and privilege to be involved in the early drafting of these recommended changes. I wasn't involved in some of the more recent iterations, but I would say first and foremost, let me share my support for the recommendations that are being proposed. I would underscore what Council has expressed to us as this being a fluid time for the Foundation, a time where continuity and clarity, I think, is really important. I would see this as a snapshot of the moment that the Foundation is in, with some recognition that as things stabilize and clarify going forward, there will probably be opportunities to come back and address some of the concerns and issues that have been raised related to things like the term limit question. But I do think that continuity is probably of greatest import right now in the Foundation's work from a governance standpoint, given the significant leadership changes that have happened there recently. I do think that we have a very strong working board right now. I want to commend not only Vanessa Wang for her significant efforts in pulling forward what was a complicated process to just present this material, but I think Jan Dahesh, our board chair, has led a very important process to galvanize our board in a way that, frankly, when I first got on, was not the case. We now have a very strong working board culture. I think that the notion is well taken that having the minimum go down to 5 may seem counterintuitive, but it merely reflects the reality that we now have a team that is a working group of 5. The idea of capping at 9, I think, is principally, as I recall, some of the discussion we had about absorptive capacity, simply not wanting to take on more change in acculturating new members too quickly now that the board has consolidated. So I guess to sum up, what I would say is I think that these are, for the moment, really sensible, appropriate, responsive changes. I don't think they're changes that I would say are permanent, lasting changes. We will probably want to come back after more deliberation, more decision-making about the ultimate decision regarding a permanent CEO. And there will probably be room for more discussion and more proposals from the Foundation Board about changes that would be appropriate in due course. But I endorse very strongly the changes that are at the table and hope that this board will see the wisdom of encouraging us to move in this direction.
Member Malumed.
On page 90, I see one sentence that you have removed that takes away a lot of our power. The Board of Governors may remove at any time without cause any director of the corporation by a majority vote of the Board of Governors. Can you talk about that some more?
Sure. What we did was, in our effort to streamline and make the document efficient, we simply moved that section down to the Section 7 so that it was in a place that kind of made more sense.
Thank you.
Member Reed.
I'd like to move the proposed revisions for the bylaws and standing orders of the foundation.
Second.
Second by Member Ramos.
McDougall.
Oh, McDougall, sorry.
Although I would have.
I know you would. I do want to echo Member Ramos's comments a bit. As you all know, I've been involved in these discussions as well, and I really want to commend our board members, Ramos and Reed, along with the president of the foundation board, Jan Dehesh, who I've worked with, and Vanessa and Keith. They've really done a yeoman's job in recrafting this. This was not easy work. It was a lot to think about, a lot to do in a very difficult time for the foundation. So first and foremost, I want to thank you all for your work, and Gary and Henry want to thank you for your leadership on this board's behalf. With that, we have a motion by Member Reed, second by Member McDougall. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Swain.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to take about a 12-minute break and return about 10:30 or so.
I wanted to put in a couple.